Now, in the last lesson, we talked about how you can take your photographs and create interesting graphic elements out of them and make an interesting layout. And in this lesson, we're going to take it a step further and take your photographs and give them a kind of cool illustrated look to them, almost look like they were drawn or even painted. So here I have a document all set up. If I go under image size, you can see that it is relatively small. It's roughly 10 by 6 at 150 ppi. Again, what I mentioned earlier about resolution, just be aware if you're going to be building something that's going to be in print, you're going to be in a much higher resolution setting. So that's all set. The only photo I have that I'm going to use is this photo of this young lady right here, and you can see it's flattened against a white background, so we need to extract the subject from the background. And since we're going to be turning this into what kind of looks like a drawing, then I don't necessarily need it to mask it perfectly. I don't need to go in and use my channels and everything. All I'm really going to use is my magic wand. And I'm going to leave it at roughly 33. I believe 32 is the default. Roughly in that area, that's okay. And I'm going to leave contiguous here checked off because I want it to select all the white area, which obviously in this case is going to be the background. But when I click and select, you'll notice it gets some of the white areas inside her face here as well. So let's take care of that. I'm going to go under the select menu and go to inverse. So it selects just the object. And let's go ahead and remove part of these areas. I'm actually going to take my lasso tool and holding down the shift key, I'm just going to draw around those areas and you'll see it adds it to the currently selected area. So with it selected, I'm going to press Command or Control J, and you'll see that pops that on its own layer. As you can see, looks pretty good, so we can now move it. What I'm going to do is grab it inside the document here and drag it up to the name of my working file, and we'll just go right down here and release, and there it places it inside the document. So we've got my image in here. Let's create how the document's going to look. Well, I'm going to go ahead and deactivate that layer for the moment, and let's select the background layer. And we're going to go into the foreground color swatch and click on it and open up the color picker. And I've already got the color that I'm going to use selected here, as you can see. And all you have to do is enter the RGB numbers here, these 219, 177, and 87. And you'll get that same color. And we'll click OK. I'm going to press Option Delete, that would be Alt Backspace on a Windows, to fill that background with that color. I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer above that one. And I'm going to press Shift Delete. And we're going to use 50% gray here. I'm going to click OK. And what we want to do here is kind of give our image a texture. If we're going to make it look like a drawing, it's going to sell the fact a little bit better if you have it on a texture that it's actually been drawn on. And you can certainly use any texture you like. I am actually going to go into the filter menu and here go to texturize, or go to texture rather, to texturize. Or into the texturizer rather. And for the sake of time, I could go in and choose all different types of textures, but I'm just going to go ahead and select this canvas. And I'm going to go ahead and leave these settings at 125% and the relief at 10, and the top I'm going to go ahead and, or the light direction, I'm going to go ahead and leave set to top. I'm going to click OK, and it applies that to that layer. Now the reason I wanted to do this on its own layer is because I want to have all my other graphic elements in between the background color and the texture layer. So I'm going to move this to the top of the layer order, and I'm always going to keep it there no matter what I add to this image. So let's go and move that up there. So now let's change the blend mode of this layer. I'm going to go ahead and change it to overlay. You'll see it applies a texture to my image there. Well, if I go ahead and activate that photograph that's now in between those layers, you'll see that it's picking up that texture. If I move it around, it's still picking up the texture. Everything looks good. So now we can process this photo so it can look like a drawing. Let's scale that in a little bit. I'm going to press Enter, and I'm going to go ahead and create a duplicate of this layer. I'm going to press Command or Control J, so I have two versions of this. And I'm going to remove the color information from this layer really quickly by pressing Shift Command U. That would be Shift Control U, and it will basically desaturate the image there, as you can see. Now with that layer still selected, I'm going to go into the filter menu down here to Stylize, Find Edges. That would be Find Edges, not Glowing Edges. Stylize, Find Edges, there it is. And what that's going to do is pretty much give me almost like a drawing effect. You can see it's giving me some really dark lines and everything like that. Now, I'm going to blend this with my image by simply changing the blend mode from normal to multiply, and that will only show the dark areas, basically giving me my sketch lines. So that'll be my sketch layer. So let's reselect this original layer, and as we did before, we're going to remove the color information. I'm going to press Shift-Command-U, and it will change that. And here's where we're going to play with the blend modes. And again, the blend modes are going to vary depending on what color background you're working on. So I'm going to try, let's see what color burn does. Probably a little much. Linear burn might be a little bit more what I'm looking for. I think that's going to work for me. But I want to lighten it up. I'm going to bring up my levels, and since I know I'm doing this for an effect, and I'm not necessarily correcting the image, I can apply the levels directly. Ordinarily, I'd probably use a adjustment layer. But in this case, I'm just going to press Command or Control L, and let's just lighten these areas up a little bit. Just to give it a little bit more detail, because it looked a little dark before. So let's just lighten that area up a little bit. And I think that will work. Now I'm going to apply one more effect to this. I'm going to go into the filter menu and go to Artistic, and we're going to go to Poster Edges. And this is going to be a very subtle effect. You can see I'm going to keep the edge thickness to 0, the edge intensity to 1. You can see the big drastic change it makes there. And I'm going to leave the posterization all the way to 6. So let's go ahead and click OK there, and it applies that effect. It's very subtle, but it is there. Now, let's reactivate both layers, and the next thing we're going to do is actually put a mask on both of these layers. So I'm going to hold down my Option key because I want the layer mask when I apply it to hide it first, and then we're going to paint it back in later. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, on PC the Alt key, and I'm just going to click the layer mask icon for this one, select this layer, holding down the Option Alt key, and we'll click a layer mask for that. So we have layer masks applied to each layer. So let's reselect the original image layer here, and I'm going to highlight the layer mask. Notice we're working directly on the layer mask, not the image itself. And we're going to go over and grab our brush tool. And let's get a very, very soft edge brush here. We'll get that 200 there. Making sure that we're painting with white, because we want to paint the white to reveal the image. And I'm just going to go in here and just start painting. Well, you can see my pressure sensitivity is on, and I don't want it to be. So let's go ahead and uncheck that in the shape dynamics. And let's go in here and start painting this image in. So I'm going to make my edge brush a little bit harder. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and hit my right bracket a couple times, and it will give me a little bit harder edge brush. There we go. And I'm just going to brush in certain areas here. Let's make that a little bit softer. Just brush in parts of this image. And it might be coming a little too harsh, so I can simply drop the opacity a little bit, and that will allow that texture to show a little bit better. Let's actually take this to about 85. I think I'm going to modify those levels a little bit, and that's the really cool thing about working with design is that you're not necessarily destroying it, you're just making it better. So if I push the gray slider in here a little bit, it's going to bring out those darker areas quite a bit more and make it look more like a drawing. I think that's what I'm going for right there. Okay. So let's paint in, back on that layer mask, let's paint in a few more areas here. Now, we're going to select that drawing layer. This is that layer right above it. We're going to select the layer mask on that. But now we're not going to paint it in like we did a moment ago. We're actually going to use something really cool. We're going to use this smudge tool, which is grouped right in here with the blur tool, if you just select smudge. And we want to get a really kind of spattery, scattery looking brush, like the one I had selected there. And just go into any of your scatter brushes and just select one. Let's grab, well, let's go ahead and use the one I've got here. So any one of these scatter brushes will do. And once you've got it selected, again, making sure we have the smudge tool selected, go in here into the options and make sure the strength is set pretty high. Not to 100, but let's keep it relatively high at about 90. And check on the finger painting. And this is really cool. It's going to give you kind of a way of brushing in that drawing layer, but not doing it so much that a brush will just bring it in as a whole. This will kind of give you a way of scattering it. And the way finger painting works is you paint, and then you smudge it around without releasing your mouse. So I'm just going to click and drag, and it's just going to bring in various parts of the drawing. All I'm doing is just clicking and dragging. If we Option or Alt click on the layer mask, this is all I'm doing. I'm just clicking and smearing that white in there. And that's what's making it visible is through those little varied white areas. So Option, click back on that, and that's how I'm bringing those areas back in. I'm just clicking and smudging the paint in. Kind of a cool way to bring that in, very subtle ways. See how it's just bringing in parts of it here and there? Just to give it a little bit of a drawing detail there. And now I'm going to do the same thing on this layer that we've got right here with the actual drawing. I'm going to get my brush again. I'm going to make that brush a little bit harder. I'm going to Shift right click, or right bracket rather, and just give this a little straight edge at the bottom of that area there. Because again, on that layer mask, we're going to use that same smudge tool and just give this kind of a smearing like it's a drawing. But before we do that, let's turn off the finger painting. We don't want it laying down any pixels while we're doing this. All we're doing is smearing the edge, this hard edge of that mask, to give it more of a drawing look there. Almost like it was drawn with markers or something like that. Pretty cool. Let's bring those areas in there. Maybe we can go up here and do some scattering there. But now it's starting to look like a little illustration. Just going to put this area in there. And you can just, depending on how much you want to reveal, just go in here and paint on areas you want to see or you don't want to see. Really, really cool. So let's see what it does. So that's doing it to a photo. Let's do it to a quick letter, actually. I'm going to take my text tool, and I'm just going to type X. And we can't see it because it filled with the same background color. So let's go ahead and bring this up, and we'll Option Delete, fill that with black. And I'm going to press Command or Control T to go ahead and free transform. Let's bring this up to size. And I'm going to go ahead and rasterize the text. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down my Control key and then right-click right on that, or just click right on that layer, and I'm going to choose Rasterize Type. Now let's lock the transparency, and under the Filter menu, I'm going to go to Render Difference Clouds. And I'm going to press Command or Control F to reapply that filter about 4 or 5 times. It starts to get a weird kind of scatter look in there. Then, keeping that transparency locked, we're going to go into the Filter menu again, and this time go to Blur and do a Motion Blur. Keep it relatively small. Let's do about 50 pixels. I think should do well. And we'll click OK. Next, we're going to go into the Filter menu and go back to that Stylize, Find Edges. And just like we did before, we're going to change the blend mode. Let's do Color Burn in this case and see what we get. It's not bad. I'm going to bring out those areas inside the letter. I'm actually going to use levels to modify that, so let's make that darker. There's those areas in there that we created with those filters. And it just gives it kind of a scratchy look, like it was either stamped on there or drawn in some way. And let's click OK. You can cycle through blend modes, see what kind of different things you get. It shows it up a little bit more there. We can drop the opacity. So it looks like it was a hand-drawn X, maybe with some shading in there. We can enhance that look by perhaps going and grabbing our brush tool. And let's get a really small brush. So let's get a number 1. Let's paint in here and see what we got. Let's make sure the shape dynamics are off because I am using a tablet. So I've got the brush tool set to a number 1 pixel. So let's just paint in there. Or actually, let's create a new layer. No, I want to paint directly on the layer, but the reason I'm not seeing it is because the transparency is still locked. Just click on that to unlock it, and now we can draw on that layer. So let's take that opacity up to about 75%. And all I'm going to do is just make some trace lines or guidelines as if this was a drawing. I'm just going to go down right here to the bottom of the letter, just hold down my Shift key and drag left to right a couple of times. And we'll do the same thing up top. I'm just going to click, hold down the Shift key, drag left to right a few times, and get some lines in there. Just get, let's do a box here. Hold down the Shift key, drag down. Gives me like architectural lines, like this was an actual drawing that somebody was trying to create or something like that. But I think you get the idea of how you can take photographs and even graphic elements and give them an illustrated look to look like they were hand-drawn. And, of course, changing the texture. Remember, that texture is on its own layer, which means we could try another texture. I can Shift-Delete and fill that with gray again. And let's do another texture. Let's go into that texturizer. And that's the cool thing about it being on its own layer is that you can try something different. Let's see what burlap would look like. Set the relief low. Let's do top right. Click OK. And it looks a little interesting there. One last thing I want to do is... Here's another effect when you get around to finishing it. It looks kind of unfinished because it almost doesn't frame it in very well. Well, create a new blank layer. Make sure it's underneath the texture layer. And again, press Shift-Delete and use 50% gray to fill. Then, go into the layer styles right here, and we're going to choose Inner Glow. Now inside here, we're going to choose a color similar to that background. Let's get something of an orangey color, or just yellow color there. That's for the color. Set the blend mode to multiply. And the opacity, we're going to leave at 75 and increase the size a lot. You'll notice how it's starting to come in there. It looks pretty cool. But it's not blending with the background. Just simply go up into the blending options here and drop the fill opacity down to 0. Now you're seeing that. Let's go ahead and increase the opacity. So now you're seeing a kind of a vignette that's burning in there and giving me a very interesting effect. We could try a different blend mode. Color burn may do something. That's a little too bright. I think I like multiply. It makes it very subtle. So we'll go and click OK, and now it frames it within there. Again, it's on its own layer. So that's a cool way of creating illustrated effects with your photos, along with the graphic effects in the previous lesson. Cool stuff.